So moving on to our final presentation on the continent, we've flown up to Cairo in Egypt, and now we're going to drop all the way back down again to the southern tip of Africa, back to Cape Town, and have great pleasure in introducing Delyno du Toit. Delyno du Toit is a manager of Organizational Performance Management branch overseeing monitoring and evaluation and data science at the City of Cape Town. Also responsible for managing the rollout of the City of Cape Town's data strategy. Delyno has an industrial engineering qualification and has worked in the United Kingdom implementing asset management information systems, and in South Africa working in the logistics, automotive, retail banking and local government industries, advising on and implementing business operation models and information systems. Now, in order to keep up with the growing cities, the public sector needs to accelerate and streamline administrative processes, work more effectively and expedite decision-making. So Delyno is going to share with us the lessons learned in establishing a data science unit in South African local government, and how digitization and administrative processes makes government more innovative and human-centered. So I think this is going to be a very fascinating discussion on how one brings sort of very much this information system side of the world, and brings an innovation and starts to link it from a human-centered perspective. So Delyno, looking forward to your presentation, and I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Richard, and thanks for the invitation. And welcome everybody. Thanks, Mafta and Yazir, for your presentations. There's some nice lessons for myself as well, and also linking to this presentation, especially around how to implement products and services with the user in mind. I think what I wanted to do is, the presentation wasn't, it's about the data science unit that we established, but when we established it, I don't think we started off with the idea of design thinking. And I think this was probably a good, the invitation to come and talk today is actually good, so to reflect on sort of the journey, and then also sort of try making the linkages to design thinking for future similar types of establishments of these types of units. And it's not to say, this won't work in every situation, but I'm sure through listening to what is being said, you'll make some linkages to your environment or your situation where you think it might be relevant to you. So I'm going to touch on two areas: the creation, how we established it, and then the operation side of things, and how we deal with it on a daily basis. So on the creation side, so I think the challenge was, especially in local government or in government per se, in South Africa, but I would assume everywhere, it is a challenge to land new concepts, specifically sort of more foreign ones, which hasn't been well established and gone through years of testing and processes and things before it gets implemented. So in this case, we came with I think it was in 2016 or 2017, we said, okay, but there's multiple things happening in the city. And at that stage, it was the crisis, the drought. There was a transformation exercise happening in the city. So the timing was right to sort of raise these discussions at that moment in time, where the city had business intelligence. So they had data, they were using the data to more look at descriptive view of the world. Not so much helping them to make better decisions, but more just to say, what did we do more than yesterday or less than yesterday, sort of thing. So, but I think the drought made them realize that, listen, there is this other world where data can add value to the decision-making process, and we need to utilize it in order not for the citizens, but also internally in the city to have a bigger impact. So the timing was right in this case to sort of land that conversation. And I think also, I mean, that there's this hype cycle of things. So I mean, it was quite high on the hype cycle. So but I think we sort of rode that cycle to say, I mean, these are things where it's possible. So linking it to saying, yeah, I mean, if you will be able to predict certain events through things that's not necessarily linked in a known way, so more unknown aspects. I mean, like if a butterfly flaps its wings, there will be a storm on the other side of the world, sort of thing. So I think there was enough crazy in there to make people realize, okay, let's just give these guys a chance. I mean, there's a reality here. We've got the crises, the droughts, but there's also this other world that we need to unpack. And then also the city was spending millions every year or every second or third year on bringing consultants in and then doing building models, helping with decision making. And because the data wasn't continuous and autonomous. So people came in, they got the data, they presented nice reports and presented nice models, but then every 2 or 3 years, they had to repeat that exercise because everything was static. So I think all these sort of things came together to make them realize, okay, let's start a data science unit in the city. And then we treated it like a startup. I mean, it was a sort of more entrepreneurial way of looking at it. I mean, so we started very small, but the important thing was the executive. I mean, we were able to convince a senior person in the organization that this is needed, and that person had a key role and a seat at the table at the executive management team, so they could represent us in the conversations. They were also well articulated. They were able to internalize what the benefits could be for the organization and what this vision could be. So they were our voice at a senior leadership. And then that individual provided us the space to establish ourselves. So not overwhelming the team with a bunch of work, but saying, okay, you figure out first what you need to do and how you need to do it. And these things will evolve into things that can have meaning for the organization. So I think that was a critical role for us, and those skills helped us a lot. And then, so I was a manager. So I think it was, so my role was basically trying to reconcile this fantasy land with the reality of government and bureaucracy and red tape. So it was, from my side of things, I was comfortable in both worlds, I would say. I mean, trying to be more exploratory and experimental and try new things, but then also able to execute within government systems and processes. So I think it was that individual is key in order to bring in these new concepts. I think if it was just somebody who came with a data science perspective, I think they would have struggled in the organization, or just the government perspective, they would have struggled as well. So I think that combination of just enough craziness with structure was key. And then also protecting the team from any red tape. And then also there was a lot of resistance. So to protect the staff and kicking down doors so that they can go on and do their work and not having to worry about all this red tape. And then we brought in 2 data scientists. So and I think it was, I mean, we also drank a Kool-Aid. We thought, okay, let's just bring these guys in and we'll have this amazing new insights into the world. But I think, so I mean, in the next slide, I'll talk a bit more about that. But what we were lucky in is that these guys they were quite technical, so they knew how to use their tools, but they also had very good soft skills. So I think that saved us because there was a lot of discussions in the organization and in terms of selling, negotiating, influencing in order to make people aware of what's possible. Also, people that thought differently to the organization. I mean, there's a certain culture in systems and organizations. So So coming in new, it was good that they weren't, or from my side, I tried to not expose them too much to that, to say, I mean, go on your own and come up with your ideas and your critical thoughts, and let's discuss it and see how we can structure it to make it more familiar to the organization and their way of working. Yeah, and it's also, I mean, the thing in government and maybe in most organizations is people saying it's not in my JD. So these individuals, I mean, they didn't know what a JD is, so they just thought, okay, it's this open canvas, this blank canvas that we can color in now. And although we here as data scientists, we've also got all these other skills that we can apply. So I think that was key for us. If we just brought in a person who's only a specialist data scientist, I think we would have struggled, and the unit would have probably not gotten off the ground. And I mean, these individuals also needs to be very entrepreneurial and experimental builders. Yeah, and then in terms of the, so I mean, yeah, like I said, we kept the team small at the beginning, so trying to get people who are passionate, opinionated, but also it was important that it's a group of people who had a collective view of the world, how things could be, and instead of how it is at the moment and how we take it from here to where we want to be. It was just people who thought very differently to the organization. And then what we did is we hid them in the org structure. So we didn't put them on a pedestal and said, here's the data science team, and overloaded them. We put them in a very far down the ladder structure, so that to say, okay, get on with it, and then as you get insights, come and let's take it up to senior leaderships where we had a chair there. So this is to illustrate. I mean, we brought these data scientists in. They were sitting on the one side, data was on the other side. But what we actually needed to do, or actually needed to start with, was somebody who could build those bridges. So in our case, building data pipelines, and so get data out of systems. So what we actually needed was a data engineer. But I mean, if by starting this unit and getting the individuals we got, that was quite diverse, skill sets, they took on that role. So I think we were lucky, but I think if one has to replicate this again, I would say, I mean, it will probably be good to get a data engineer in, or somebody who can build those pipelines and get you your data for the data scientists to work with. Otherwise, you'll pay them lots of money and they'll sit there and not be able to produce anything. And then there was also a lot of gatekeepers, so people who said, but you want this data, but sorry, here's all the 100 reasons why you can't get it. So it was key for us to have that executive guardian angel over us, so to say that these individuals and this team they've got a status and credit in the organization. So so it sort of validated our work, and then saying, yeah, the other approach, so that was the one side, the guardian angel, and then the other side is working through business. So not directly talking to this gatekeepers and trying to challenge them, but to rather work with business. So somebody in a transport or a health or safety and security, and say, you've got this need, we can help you with this need, but in order for us to help you, you need to go to the gatekeepers and tell them, this is your data, they must make it available to us. So it was just a different approach that we followed. Instead of tackling the problem head on, we tried to find other ways around it, and other people to open the doors for us. Yeah, so I think those were just sort of reflections. You won't get it right the first time. But it's important to get people who understand that and thrive in that environment, because I mean, I had situations where individuals came in and it was too much for them, too unstructured, so and they couldn't cope. So I mean, I mean, obviously the type of individual is important to thrive in this environment. And then we kept the roles and responsibilities quite vague. I mean, there was sort of this foundational JD, but we tried to not limit ourselves to that, so that it gave us time to explore and refine what we actually needed to do. But then once that was clear, then we fixed it, fixed the JDs. and then there was lots of gatekeepers, and we used business to open those doors, and then the executive gave us that status and validation in the organization. So that was just some views on the creation side of things. On the operational side of things, so yeah, again, I think we were in a lucky state where, if you look at most of the organization, it's a very compliance and order-driven setup government. So most of the actions is tailored towards that. So most of the people submit to sort of this sheet music, and there's some manager, a conductor that supervises them and guides them. So yeah, I mean, it's mostly, you can think of it as classical musicians doing their work. Where with the data science, we tried to, so I mean, I was listening quite a lot to podcasts recently, and one of them spoke about jazz. So that's how I sort of threw jazz into this mix. But what I liked about what they were saying is that jazz has got there is a structure there, but it's not that prominent. It's not that it doesn't have to be followed to the T. So it's jazz musicians are able and willing to improvise. So there is the structure is largely implicit and tacit in the music and in the artists, but it comes from an underlying principle. So there is this underlying principles which the members agree on, and the values and how they will go about it. But within it, people are able to improvise. But that doesn't mean it leads to chaos and confusion. I mean, it frees up creative capabilities. As an example, in our case, we conform to open standards. So that was sort of our the principles that we followed. But within it, we were open to say you can go and try multiple things around that, as long as it comes back to these standards, and then we can test it against it. And then, yeah, I mean, so there's lots of imperfections in jazz music, but those are sources of learning, similar with the experience that we had. And the important thing is this competence and trust, and then the soloist, the leadership, and the wide repertoire of the crew. So I think where it becomes key is, if you look at most IT organizations, most IT setups and big organizations, is it's a very monolithic setup. So and it's a contract management approach. So we go out on a contract and we manage that contract instead of being the people who build the tools. Where in our case, it was very much needing to understand the tools from first principle, and then build it up. And in order to, so it was people with the knowledge to advise. If need be, they could advise IT in terms of how to do things as well. But at the same time, there was this trust internally that we've got competent people who we can rely on. And they were able to utilize it on lots of instruments, lots of technologies, so not limited to certain instruments or certain applications or software. And I think a big thing was this trust between the group. So that you allow them to go off on their own and play their solo, knowing the fact that they always apply or conform to the principles at least, and have the semi-structure that that guides them. And then ultimately it ends up being, if all of this comes together, the band is very autonomous, interdependent, and mutually enriching. So you don't have to micromanage anybody. I mean, they can go in on their own and come up with new ways of doing things, but also deliver on the client's needs. And that also, so in the fact that they can go on of their own and do their own solo, it gives them that temporary leadership. So that trust in terms of them representing the unit in key meetings. Where I don't have to worry about what they will be saying in contradicting the unit, because we're in sync as a group, and we know what the underlying principles are. Then in terms of force, so I think a key thing for us was to try and look at force multipliers, because we were a small team. So creating this illusion that we've got hundreds of people working in our unit. So we set up a scalable infrastructure. So all that means is as new people join, the system or the underlying infrastructure will scale on its own to accommodate more people. It wasn't dependent on us having to now go and do something for each new individual joining the platform that we built. We also, when we do models or do data science models, we try and make it transferable. So if the model works in health, as an example, it should be transferable to safety and security. For example, certain predictions, if you want to do computer vision and look at informal settlements, you should be able to utilize that same underlying concepts in transport and identifying objects in a picture, roads, toilets, taps, etc. And then it was about automation. So now we build the models, we've got the infrastructure, but we don't want to do it every day, coming back to the bringing in consultants every X number of years. So we automate it, or we automate everything we do, so that we can, it's not dependent on us, it's not dependent on a human, it can go on its own. And then, as I mentioned, we standardized, but standardized on standards, so open standards, not on technology, where in most instances, people bring in a specific ERP system, or they bring in a certain productivity system, and they think that is a standard. But all that you end up with is you're limiting yourself to only working with that technology, where we're trying to say it doesn't matter what the technology is, you should be able to work with the data, the underlying data, and deliver the product. And then we just embraced open source, but I think that's sort of a whole chat on its own. But I think the concept is nice in that you don't limit yourself to your capabilities and skills. By making it open source, you bring in over a couple of million other people across the world who can help you with your development. You can help them, they can help you. So it's a really nice sharing community on doing the work. The other thing is, started a movement. So I think that's also key. I mean, being so small, a small team, we made lots of promises, but then we were able to deliver on it. I think without delivering it, I think the unit would probably have not existed anymore. And then, so we moved beyond that sort of singular event, that fad, and then provided this foundational products for the organization that could create that experience for them over and over again. So it wasn't just a once-off where they got used to it and then somebody leaves, somebody gets sick, and everything falls flat as well. So it was a continuous experience that they had. So also important is we didn't try to come with something totally different. We linked it to something that was already in existence. So a motion that was already in existence. So that was around data. People had business intelligence, but there was this need for utilizing the data to make more informed decisions. And there was a lot of grumbling in the organization around it. So data was a big topic. So it was linking to that and then building onto that sort of discussions and expanding on it. And then also we made it unique to in terms of the experience. So it was the products that we provided was things that the organization wasn't used to before. So it's a good and a bad thing. So it gave this wow factor, but also then it comes with a lot of hand-holding to make sure that people utilize it correctly. And then by us providing them the products and then engaging with it, it sort of automatically, autonomously created this community where people started wanting our services and wanting the products. And then asking for training, approaching us to help them with their work and how can they improve themselves, how can they get these skills in-house. so people ended up coming to us instead of us going to them. Through just us putting this experience in their hands, having them play with it, giving them exposure to it, and then supporting this community, this like-minded community, by putting in community of practices, engagement sessions with them, where we share our knowledge with them, and then and they share with us. So we learn the domain, they learn the technology and the underlying way of working. So and that basically that community is our biggest competitive advantage in the organization, because there are other entities, and I mean it's a large organization, 30,000 people, so you can think there's a lot other areas in the organization that also want to do similar things, but I think this without us even knowing about it or being deliberate about it, this community is coming up for us and saying we are the go-to team, and people should work with us first before they start wanting to explore other things. And then ultimately, I think it sort of links to the previous one. You create this promise, but you need to get it done. So it's all about putting the data-based insights or the product in the hands of the people that's actually doing the day-to-day work. So I think in most cases leaderships want some sort of product they can look at. They want to monitor people, but in the end nothing really changes. So it's those people that's actually doing the work where the change sits in the organization. So working closely with them, providing them with prototypes, co-creating with them on a continuous iterative basis. And then I think one thing we did find is, especially in our space, people struggle to articulate their needs. But I think that it's not just relevant to data or the situation. I think in most cases, people try to link their need to some sort of a tangible product. In our case, it was the dashboard. They thought that by just having a live dashboard, all their needs and problems will be answered. But then as you provide them the dashboard, you realize that actually they've got this other underlying problems that they need to solve, and a dashboard is only it's providing visibility, but it's not telling them how they should be addressing it. And then also just not by providing a product without having the supporting structures in place is also, we found, obviously the product will die. So you have to have continuous engagements, continuous business processes to create that experience over and over again to support the product. So linking that to the product being used in management meetings, sort of being the first item on the agenda, looking at the data, and then engaging with it and saying, okay, but what are we going to do? What are the actions? So it facilitates the conversation, but not just that, the operational teams and processes are in place to then take those actions and execute on it. And then closing the loop back into the meetings where you then see the impact and of those actions. And then, so I think the one thing that we got pulled into quite a bit of policy and strategy discussions, but we realized is, it is quite tempting to think that getting the right policy or strategy in place will fix your systemic issues. And so I think, it's going to sound maybe counterproductive, but it sucked quite a lot of our energies in being part of these discussions, these high-level discussions. So what if this and what if that, where we felt that by working more closely with the people on the ground doing the work, and being immersed in the data and immersed in the domain, the policy or strategic decisions evolved out of that, and it was quite clear what needed to be done, instead of starting from a high level point of doing an intervention, a once-off intervention, looking at the data and then saying we must change the way we to put in place a transport policy, as an example, but rather work with those transport individuals on a day-to-day basis. For example, we did one with finance where we worked on the collection ratio and the revenue collections, where it became quite apparent what should be done in the lower income brackets, and specifically in specific areas. So it was by spatializing the data, it was quite clear where through the engagements where the focus should be, how they should be assisted through tariffs, through all these sort of levers in order to help them. Yeah, so it basically brings us to the fact that we see, I mean, our view is that the only policy should be implementation, instead of having discussions are good and it's important, but ultimately, yeah, I mean, people want to see tangible things change. They want to see an impact, and I think so that, I mean, our focus is more on that space. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I mean, there's different spaces for these things. So we also found that obviously as we engage more, we became success was our sort of was a trap for us, because we got pulled into more meetings, so taking away time from doing the work, but at the same time it was also an opportunity, the success we had, because it opened doors for us in the organization. And then, yeah, I think, like I said, the team was quite diverse and they had lots of skills, so they became sort of pulled into meetings as leadership roles, having to advise on things. So again, that took away time from doing the work. So it's just something to be aware of, to protect the team from those leadership roles. It's important. I think it's important for them to have it, but it's key to utilize those individuals in the right scenarios, because they can quickly become, I mean, 8 to 5, they'll just be sitting in meetings. So it's choosing the ones that just got the highest impact. And then, yeah, so the last 2 or 3 slides was just to sort of show some of the sort of principles. I mean, so what we found over the years now is, what is important is this common view that one needs to create with the user, because we come in with a specific view of the world in how we look at data, and then the user has got a view of the world in terms of the operations. So the first time we show the data, it obviously doesn't make sense to them. There's some familiarity there, but we go through a process of verifying that what the data is showing is actually what's happening on the ground. So it's a process of just creating this common view, where we create the foundation before we move into, you can think of it probably more sort of statistical or advanced statistical aspects, where we will just totally lose them if we haven't set the scene first. So, but this normally takes a couple of months. It's not a quick process. So, and that links back to the operational thing. So utilize this, look at the common view, create it, utilize it on a daily basis, and then from there you build your more advanced insights. This was just to show some, so it's probably more just on the data side. Once you get to advanced analytics, it's important that people understand, again, what they're looking at, because we were asked to do a prediction of land invasions in Cape Town. So the client asked us to take call data, people calling in about land invasions, and then predicting where land invasion would be. But we realized that by doing that, all you're doing is you're getting quite good at predicting when somebody would call in about a land invasion and not an actual land invasion, because there's a person walking in a specific area, so somebody will call in and say he thinks there's an invasion, but when you go and investigate, that's not the case. So out of the 100 calls, potentially only 20 was actually real land invasions. So it's important to understand the data, understand the domain before you actually build these models. And again, I think, I mean, there was only 1% of the city that had land invasion. So, I mean, if you build a model, you would be right 99% of the time. But the problem is that 1% that you're wrong, which is the critical thing. So, so it's also important to understand what your model is telling you. And then what we did find is the model, we could do all this fancy predictions and things, but the business unit wasn't ready for it, because they didn't have the standards and the case management systems in place in order to collect the data in a standard way and feed it back into the model. So all of these things just needs to come together, obviously, to make it work. So it was used in this sort of few once-off cases, but if you really want to create that experience over and over again. Obviously, the business need to put certain things in place, and you need to then automate it. This was nice because we didn't do the work. It was an outside company, but they did it based on the way that we work. So they used open source. So it cost us nothing for the city. It was in terms of licensing, in terms of software development, those sort of things. It was quite a young group of guys who was familiar in the asset management space. So they worked on city with electricity and built a system for them to look at their mini subs and the replacements of mini subs. But what was nice in this case, most in government, I mean, you have to go through a procurement process that takes a year. Or first of all, you need to define your need, the specs, so that takes a couple of months. Then you have to go to procurement, it takes a couple of years before you actually get a product or get somebody in to build a product. What was nice in this case is these guys, we didn't have to go through a procurement process. So they could build it for us in 3 months. In the morning, we plugged it into our environment, and the client could play with it, and they could propose changes. And the people who build it, they could make those changes on the fly. So it was very a collaborative approach, real time, and yeah, and I think this is where we want to be, and so we've tested it now in a couple of places, and it's working quite well, saving us monies and time. So yeah, this is a nice one. And then the last one, just, yeah, so I mean, I think the fact that we were able to put all of this together before a crisis hit, the infrastructure, the models, the way of working, the way of thinking about the world, made us very agile to when a crisis hits. So we were able to respond within a couple of days, weeks, with products that inform the organizations. I mean, how you should think about burials, how you should think about where your risk is in terms of your operations, your staff on the ground, I mean, and service delivery. So it enabled us to respond quickly to shocks. I think in future it will be even quicker now because of this pre-work that we've done. Where if we didn't exist, it would have been, yeah, I mean, in reality, it would have been a couple of months before they even had a product because the city wasn't, the systems wasn't talking to each other. The systems wasn't set up in order to deliver these sort of insights for the organization. Yeah, so yeah, I think that was just sort of a reflection. I hope there was some insights there for yourselves. But yeah, it was for me. It was quite nice to just reflect on where we were and where we are at the moment. Yeah.